Hello, everyone. It's 2, so let's get going. So, welcome to the Untold Stories. This is a cherished session of the ISEE annual conference brought by the emerging professionals. And last year we did a new kind of format, like a late night show, and it was with the ISEE past president Alistair Torrance and Mr. Tom Palangio. And this year we'll stick with this format because we thought it was interesting. And we are privileged to welcome two exceptional guests who have dedicated their lives on advancing seismograph technologies and enhancing blasting practices. So the topic for this year is the history of seismograph development. And let me introduce Randy Wheeler, our first guest, a proud member of ISEE since 1983. And Randy is the president of White's Industrial Seismology. Hi.
Oh, I like this couch. I like it a lot. First, I want to say how grateful I am to be asked to do this. It's an honor for the emerging professionals to do things like this because a lot of us old folk may not be around much longer, and so we need to get some of this history out there.
Appreciate it. So let's get going. So Randy, could you give us a brief history of some of the major seismograph developments in the 1900s?
Sure, and these dates are not necessarily very good, and I am going to focus what I'm going to say on North America, because back when I came in the business in the 70s, we didn't have the internet, not a lot of international stuff went on. So I'm going to talk about what I know. So if you look up there, you'll see something called a falling pin seismograph, developed in the 1920s. Then we also have the lead seismograph, developed in the 40s, and I've got the spring nether listed as being in the 60s, but I really think it was probably in the 40s as well. And then once we get into the 1970s, you have Dallas Instruments. They were what I was brought up in the business in. That's what White used at the time. And then once we got into the 80s, into the development of digital seismographs, we had us and Instantel and Nomas, and there probably were a couple of others that I'm not intentionally not mentioning any names, but that's kind of what I'm familiar with.
Okay. So the falling pin seismograph is a fascinating concept. Can you explain how it worked?
Sure. This picture is from our display case. We have one at our office. What you have is a base that is adjustable, so you can make it completely level. And then you have a bunch of machined pins, and they're very precisely machined. And you place these pins inside this holder to protect it from the wind and all sorts of other things. And the thing of it is, since those those pins are very machined, they'll topple given certain excitations. So when you had an event and you come back to look at it, some of the pins may have fallen down. If they did, you had a chart that gave you minimum levels of displacement, velocity, and acceleration for those pins to fall. The theory was if none of the pins fell, you couldn't have damaged anything.
Interesting. So, did the founder of White's Industrial Seismology ever develop a seismograph of his own?
He did. The founder of White was named Harold White, and he developed what was called the ER300. It was billed or advertised as being portable, but unless you were Arnold Schwarzenegger or had a mule or something, you weren't going anywhere with that thing. But it was unique in the sense that you could check its calibration. You had the ability to do that and direct printed. I think there were only 4 of them ever made. We have one. 2 of them went somewhere in France, and I don't know where the other one is.
So the White Industrial Seismology was a significant user of Dallas Instruments seismographs. So can you share some insights of the models they used and how these seismographs operated?
Sure. When I came in the business, like I think I started in '78, the instrument at the very bottom is nothing but a peak meter. So you set it out, and a vibration occurred, and the meter read something. And an operator would look at that and write down what they thought it was, and that wouldn't work very well today. But back then, that's kind of what you had. There were also 30-day chart recorders, which you put a roll of chart paper in them. You'd make a note of the date and time when you put them in. When you went and take them out, because you'd leave them out for about 30 days, you'd make a note of the date and time when you took them out. Then you'd interpolate between those two on the chart strips, and you could see because the instrument would tick up and tick down slowly whenever there was a vibration. So if you had a blast record, you could correlate that back, hopefully, and make some sort of determination.
Okay. And in those earlier days of analog technology, how were the data from these units analyzed?
Okay. This next slide will show some of the tape recording units. One of the earliest ones was called the BT4, and it was a 4-channel seismograph, 3 seismics, 1 acoustic, and it used a cassette tape. Now, since it's 4 channels, the whole width of the tape was used. So if you had a 60-minute cassette, you didn't have 60 minutes, you had 30 minutes. So you'd take it out in the field, you'd set it up. Hopefully you had some idea of when the shot was going to be. Hopefully you'd hear the siren. You'd hold a button down to make a physical note like, hi, I'm Randy Wheeler, I'm at this quarry at this date at this house and whatever. And then hopefully you'd hear the shot, and then hopefully you'd hear the all clear to know you could stop, and hopefully you didn't run out of tape. Also, one of the biggest innovations by Dallas Instruments during this time period was the self-triggering seismograph, an instrument that would self-trigger. So you had these switches that you could set trigger levels, and I think it was like 0.02, 0.05, 0.1, 0.25. But when the instrument received a vibration at that level, it would self-trigger, and it had a buffer of analog data that it would keep, that it would put in front of the triggered data, and then the instrument would run for some duration. The neat thing about it was, if that vibration stayed above that trigger level, it would just keep running. So it was automatically able to do that. And that was a significant innovation, I got to tell you. And then, at that point, we're getting into the early 80s, and people are talking about digital seismographs. And for the life of me, that I'll never understand, Dallas Instruments did not jump on that train. They decided to take a step backward and develop the ST4D, D meaning digital, but the only thing digital about it was it stored a summary of the event, date, time, peaks, that kind of thing, that you could retrieve digitally, but the waveform was still on cassette. So you still had to put that cassette in a reproducer, and you had to listen for the blast, and then you had to start your paper running, and paper was very expensive back then to produce your records. So they took a step backwards, and we had to look other directions.
Interesting. And fast forward to today, where do you see the state of seismograph technology now?
Well, the state now, of course, is digital. And digital seismographs gave us a lot of great things, like, for example, no longer analog, digital, so you had easy access to it, and really reduced the time required for analysis. Like I said, one of the things I did when I was first hired is my job was to take a year's backlog of tape-recorded vibration and analyze it. And that took a lot of time. Anyway, that took a lot of time. So, whoops. So what I used to take me a day, I could do in like a few minutes.
Exactly. So let's just let train go.
But But, yeah, but in addition to those, the thing I want you to really understand is that even with digital seismographs, nothing has really changed in terms of what we measure. We still use velocity geophones. We still do overpressure microphones. The frequency response has changed somewhat. But what we're measuring hasn't changed at all. We're just measuring it differently. We're doing it digitally instead of analog. And that's allowed us to move forward in the industry with like performance standards, which were badly needed because prior to that, anybody could make a seismograph and say we got a seismograph, but nobody knew how good it was. So once we had those standards, now everybody has to adhere to a set of criteria that make sense and help instruments all be very conformative.
Thank you, Randy. And now to add a new perspective on this conversation, I will invite Dr. Catherine Aimone Martin. Cathy joined ISEE in 1978 as the member number 78, making one of the earliest contributors to precision organization.
Hello. Nice to meet you. Hi. Ooh, that is nice. I do.
Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. Yes.
So, Cathy, from your perspective, how the evolving needs of blasting influenced the development and production of seismographs?
Well, I think if I can map onto Randy, it just happens that when I joined Northwestern University and Chuck Dowding, I was his first PhD student. And he needed a PhD student to become full professor. So we had an agreement. I would stay with him so he could become full professor. It just happened at that time, he was working with the Bureau of Mines. Of course, he did 8507 and some of the other publications. And at that time also, the regulations, or the 8507, and I talked about that at the seismograph section, I believe, that the Z-curve was adopted by OSM as regulation. And so there was a lot of pressure on the Bureau of Mines to explain that. The Bureau of Mines wanted me to do a cost study in the United States to see what it was costing the coal mining industry to comply with the OSM standards that were taken from their research. And so I thought, well, in order to do that, I need to go out and put, I needed to see what kind of changes there were in the blasting industry. And so I needed a seismograph. So I called Dallas Instruments. And Dallas Instruments, I flew down to Dallas, and I didn't meet with you, but I met with Larry Cornelius. And Larry Cornelius was working with Dallas Instruments. And I think at that time when he said Dallas Instrument went backwards and didn't go to the digital, Larry said, I'm going to go digital. And I think that's when Larry separated, is that right? And I followed him because I knew that was kind of instrumentation I wanted. Now at the time, you've got to think about what was happening in the explosives industry. At that time, we were leaving pure ANFO and we were developing emulsions. And we were looking at sensitizers and emulsifiers. We had Dr. Pereira, we hired him at New Mexico Tech to help with the development of emulsions for stability and performance and that sort of thing, doing a lot of research in that. So there were some needs to show, we were using microballoons at the time. Does everybody remember microballoons in the explosives, as a sensitizer, if you will? And so there were a lot of things that we were doing with the explosive formulation that needed testing. And so that was something that we thought with seismographs, we could develop sensors and that sort of thing. Yeah, there we go. That we could use to look at pressure and look at fragmentation, how it performed out in the field. Now at the same time, if you remember, some of you might, we were developing initiators. I actually started in the late 70s with electric plastic caps. So I used electric plastic caps all the time, but they were limited at how many holes you could shoot. And then all of a sudden non-L came in, and Dr. Persson developed the non-L system in Sweden, and came to the United States. The Swedish Tectonics Institute came to the United States and said, who wants to sell this? We've got this wonderful non-electric product. And everybody poo-pooed it, except for Ensign Bickford. They said, we'll do it, we'll take it. But at that same time, the Z curve was in place. We had to go lower in our peak particle velocities on the low frequencies. The non-L system came in very, very handy because you had more control on timing. And so I did a lot of research with Ensign Bickford with the emulsions, and with Larry Cornelius starting the digital seismographs, we could see that there was some big benefits to the smaller systems. I had one of those Filberger instruments. This was the size of this table, and with a rotating light paper. And it was very heavy to carry and so forth. So when Larry got his smaller instruments, I mean, it was the size I could put it in my hand, we were winning. But it did have limitations at that time on sample rate and the velocity and air over pressure. But we did what we did, and we were able to really move forward with characterizing the performance of non-electric systems at that time, and then the emulsions. But then again, the next phase was electronics. And so at the same time, that's when the seismographs became smaller and more versatile with higher sample rates and higher pressure sensors. Every time I called Larry and I said, I need a 20 inch per second velocity sensor, an 80. He made me an 80. He said, Cathy, wow, you're the only one who wants this. I said, no, you make it, someday will come. And we did. It was true. We were able to get 80 inch per second. They were accelerometers, though, at that time, but they worked very well. Our 20 inch per second, because our idea was to get close in to detonating explosives with the new initiators technology to see the performance, the accuracy, and the fragmentation, and how the rock reacted to the different emulsions and timing. So as the explosive industry evolved very quickly, so did the seismographs. And so what I've got here is the type of sensors that we started to use with the heavier instruments that we had, the digital, and now we were able to get the seismograph down to a much smaller size that we could put in our hand. And then Larry made us breakout boxes in that little seismic breakout box there. We were actually able to put pressure sensors, strain gauges. We were able to put quartz gauges for air over pressure. We were working with ATF on all kinds of disposals, I should say. So the pencil probes that had quartz crystals on them. And then the underwater, I think there they are, tourmaline underwater pressure sensors for underwater blasting. So we were able to use those with the signal conditioner and then break those out and put them into the seismograph. At the same time, those small seismographs could be put in series, and they were able to make a trigger unit that would send a half-volt pulse, I think. Was it a 1 volt or something pulse to all the others connected in series, you know. And we could have up to 20 or 50 seismographs all connected in series, all with their special sensors. It was amazing.
Great.
Yes. And so here's some photographs of some other changes. There's Brent Mines right there. And Larry also made us borehole sensors that we could put them down the holes and into the string down a hole, so we could look at the variation in ground vibration with depth. You can see how it affected foundations and so forth. So Brent's there taping a borehole sensor. Would we put 5 of them in there? I think we did. And this is what they look like. We had the electronics in the sensors in the beginning. And of course, you have to pot them in there with cement. And so we would lose the sensor, cut it off, save the wire. And then I think it was you, who said, why do you put the electronics down hole and lose them all? So they took the electronics out and put them right next to the seismograph, and then all that's down there, the little, what are those?
Just geophones.
Yeah, the geophones, but the electronics are out of the hole. So all we had to do is cut on the other end of the electronics, and we saved the electronics. So that was good. I mean, that was an evolution of being cost effective, I guess. And so we're putting that down next to the house. We talked about that house today, in fact. So go ahead to the next one. And I'm just showing you some of the applications of the new technology and the new, and this is what happened in the house I talked about today, the Ohio house. This is, and Brent is now doing the instrumentation. Now, I no longer do instrumentation, I only do blast consulting, and Brent has taken over all of our instrumentation, and he's been able to to bring that to a much wider application, if you will. So he's got all the seismographs lined up in the house closet, and then his modem. And that's another thing. The modems have been very, very helpful because we download remotely now. So he can download and remote all of those seismographs. And then on the far end, on the left-hand side, the right-hand side is the instrumentation for the electronics for the non-geophones. So all the other pressure sensors and so forth. So go ahead to the next one. And underwater pressure, we've done quite a bit of underwater pressure instrumentation also. And this is next to a house that we instrumented. And then the next one, I think is, there we go. So the air overpressure that we've been doing. A little bit of demolition like Keith talked about today. Of course, the smokestacks, and there is the world's largest gantry crane that we took out a few years ago on the Ohio River. And we used the air pressure sensors for that. And that's where we asked Larry, now you're making them now, the higher air pressure sensors up to 10 PSI. And they work very, very well. So we get 5 PSI sensors or 10 PSI sensors, and they're just like the 148s that we all use, but they're much better. And they perform excellently. Right, a 0.3. Now we can go to 10 PSI, and it really helps. We can do some propagation studies, look at the propagation of air overpressure with distance. We can get really close in, and it's kind of nice. You just can't let any fragment go inside in the end. We've blown a few, once maybe. And then, of course, some other demolitions there in New Orleans. And so we have been able to characterize the performance of explosives for not only the benefit of fragmentation and rock breakage, but also to protect structures. So we do both. We do a little bit of each. I think I answered everything.
So then you got to push the industry to
Yes.
give all these technologies.
Yeah.
And so how these technologies then impacted the application effectiveness of the blasting operations?
The explosives.
Yeah.
They are, and I think I can give you one example where we did a big study in Wyoming in the coal mines when we were looking at sensitizers and then those micro balloons, I guess they were, and the blasting company was blasting way too fast down the rows and then waiting too long, going back into the burden. And it was causing all kinds of orange smoke, all kinds of, they were wasting explosive energy. And so we did a signature hole analysis and realized they had to slow down going in the front row and then along the rows and then speed up in the back. So we had put, we took some emulsions and put them in bags and put them behind the back row. And then we also we built our own ytterbium pressure sensors, and we were putting them in the borehole so we could see what the actual PSI was for the detonation of this explosive. And I think we read something like 36,000 PSI for the emulsions. But when we were looking and we were comparing the slow speed to the fast speed, we took these emulsion packets all the way down. It was about a 1/4 mile blast, and we'd pull them out afterwards and then wash them off and then look at the pulverization of the glass beads. And sure enough, right at the initiation point, the beads were fine. But as we went down that 1/4 mile, by the time we got to the very end, there was no single bead left because they were shooting way too fast. So we combined the pressure sensor, we correlated the pressure to the percentage of beads that were crushed to show the mine that they had the wrong timing and they were wasting a whole bunch of energy. So that worked out really well. So I think with the data acquisition systems we have now, we're able to use the right kind of sensors with digital technology at higher sample rates. And I must say that another thing that I pushed Larry on is the sample rate. I kept asking him for higher and higher sample rates. I don't know if you remember when he first had digital seismographs, I think we had 1,000 samples per second. 1,024. And then I wanted more than that. I wanted 248. He said, then I wanted 496. And then I wanted 8,000. I wanted 16,000. He kept saying, Cathy, why do you want this? Why do you want all this? I said, because we can learn more. And that's exactly what happened. Now, this gentleman makes 128,000 samples on one channel. And that really helps with a lot of our gauges, because that's about the strain, that's about the sample rate that you need for some of the close-in pressure measurements and accelerations. So I think with that evolution of seismographs, faster timing rate, more memory, what else? More memory, faster, low-end resolution. Mother at the low end for far away. That really helped. So now we have a wide spectrum of abilities to do both close-in and far field to improve on our performance of the explosives. So it's a feedback loop. Yeah, it works very, very well. And the blasters learn. We learn, the blasters learn. So I think the seismographs have been very helpful for our business, certainly, and I think for the blasting industry as a whole.
So, also, looking ahead to the future, how do you, it can be for both of you guys, how do you envision the future of blasting seismographs?
Well, I think by looking at the past, seeing how things have moved forward, we can kind of talk a little bit about where the future is going to be. From my perspective, I've seen it grow from analog to digital to much higher sample rates to remote access stuff with modems and routers. And like I said before, instead of getting your data in a month, if you're lucky, you get your data right away. Right away. And nearly everybody's seismograph can do these things. This isn't a commercial for us or anything. Everybody can do that. So I think the future, for me, is the hardware may change some. There may be higher sample rates, there may be more memory, there may be this or that or the other, but the geophones are the geophones. If we're going to continue to do particle velocity, that's not going to change. What I think the future is in accessibility of the data, how we're going to get the data, how accessible it's going to be. And my thought for the future is it'll just be very commonplace to be anywhere in the world. Just get your data anytime you want it.
And I would add the fast turnaround time that we get from our accessing our data immediately afterwards. We can get that data to the blaster because the blaster wants to know. They want to know right away. The sooner we can get that performance values to them, the happier they are. It's not that they're waiting. Well, sometimes they are waiting for another blast, but I think blasters appreciate that because time is money. Yeah.
We have here a privileged opportunity to ask any question to this gentleman and lady. So if you guys have any question or a remark.
Getting a reading of a 10 psi from some of those demolition projects, how does that correlate to a decibel level?
Oh my goodness, what's 10 psi to this? Well, it's 180,
It's like
180, 84, something like that, 184. We haven't broken glass with that. I'm going to tell you right now. You know me, I don't believe these limits for damage. I'm not a damage, but we built windows at ATF and hit them at about 180, 190, and we have not gotten a broken window.
So do you foresee some changes in the regulations that are currently at 132 or less?
It'd be nice, but I think the human aspects, the human response is going to keep that low, unfortunately. Yeah. But that's a good question.
So on demolition in the past, say, 5 years, the lowest that I've witnessed a breakage of a glass is 163.
Oh my goodness, what kind of is it old glass?
It was old single pane
Yep.
glass, and
Yep.
then I did see a cracked pane fall out at 156.
yeah.
But that we had in the pre-blast inspection, the evidence of the window already being cracked. But I was right beside of that building when the window fell out and crashed. It's like you can hear it in the video, so there's no doubt about that one. The other one was a on-site structure that was going to be torn down anyway. But I put a seismograph there because I knew there was a good chance that the windows may be broken.
Exactly,
And
yeah.
you know, these demolition contractors are doing everything they can to mitigate this. And you know, there are some things that help, but you know, when you're doing open air, there's not a whole lot that you can do to control it, unfortunately.
But you make a good point, because glass, if you look at the evolution of glass and glass, they say we're not making glass that much stronger, but I think they are. But what they're doing is putting them into the frame more securely. So I think the older they are, they lose their the rubber gasket. And
Yeah, and you know, a couple of these were firm windows. They weren't windows that would open. And even before I can remember, we walked by. I mean, they would flex just by you know touching them with your fingers. So that you know, and any window is going to do that. And you know, obviously the larger the window is, the more susceptible it is to breakage.
One of the things that you need to be careful about when you're doing PSIs that large is that we always recommend that you get extension cables to get the microphone away from the data collector, because those high pressures hitting that data collector will cause problems to it and potentially mess up your measurements.
I forgot to mention that. We have at least 100 feet away. We keep all our seismographs clustered far away. That's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, and I would just add one thing. I mean, we can take the advancements as far as, you know, imaginable, but it all goes back to who's installing it. And it needs to be installed properly, and we discussed that in depth yesterday, but that's step one, regardless of whose seismograph you have or how you're using it. But if you're not installing it properly, the data is useless.
Exactly. Very good.
I have a question. Thank you very much for coming on the show here for us. You gave a great history there, and I just kind of have a question on the subject of the newer members that are coming into the society. With all the history that you have, what do you want the newer members to focus on going forward into the future as actual people going to be working on this?
I feel very blessed to have come into business when I did, because I saw it. It's always fun. It's always fun to get in at the very bottom of something and see it grow into something what it is. And so for those of you out there, just because you're going to see changes in technology that I can't even consider. So take this time now and understand the history of where you are right now, because where you are 40 years from now is going to be incredibly different than what it is right now. So just keep track of your own history and be aware of everything that's come before you and everything that's going to come in the future.
Keep your mind wide open. You have a question, I bet.
Yeah, you talked a lot about the evolution of the hardware of the seismographs going. I was curious about the evolution of the analysis.
Yeah.
Because they were printing, like it's basically a pen that went back and forth on the paper, a grid paper. And so you had to look at that after the fact to see, I guess, the amplitude peak on where it was in the grid. With the USBM 8507 being a frequency-based thing, how did you do frequency analysis in the beginning?
It wasn't very easy. With the analog stuff, you're right. You had to produce a paper. You had to measure it with a ruler. You had to handwrite your analyses. There was no such thing as an FFT or anything like that. What happened with us is we ended up buying a very expensive Hewlett-Packard digitizer, and I wrote code. That's one of the things I'm very fortunate to be able to do, is I wrote code to use that digitizer to digitize these analog records. And once we did that and got them in digital form, then we could start doing these analyses. So a lot of the 1980s, I spent writing code to do FFTs, response spectra, velocity frequency curves, all the stuff you're talking about. Without digitization, it was nearly impossible to do those things.
You forgot to say you're a geophysicist.
Not so much.
Well, he's very good at it. He understands geophysics. And that's the fun thing about working with him. I forgot about the signature hole analysis. That was very important to us when you built that algorithm for signature hole analysis. Does everybody use that now, people, to design, optimize on the timing? Now with electronics, it's so important. Signature hole analysis will allow you to model your detonations, your blast holes, burdens and spacing, and then your timing, and then run through with the frequency analysis. And then optimize on the frequencies you want to emphasize based on timing and your geology. And I use it a lot. Of course, to increase frequencies, especially with construction blasting or quarry blasting where you can increase frequencies to mitigate any kind of perception and response of structures. And that's very important. So the software that goes along with these digital seismographs are very important to us to help blasters. Yeah.
It's really interesting too. Sorry, my voice is almost going. One of the new frontiers I think that we've got to look into is to look at, when we look at the environmental impact of blasting, is acoustic responsive houses.
Right.
What we, I think we understand damage levels now, but in fact, the key thing is that, a person can experience the same level of vibration inside and outside a house and get a completely different response. And I think that that's the area we need to look at because, certainly in the UK, we're in a situation now where, every quarry has got a house within 400 meters. And so when you're talking about that, then, there's a potential for people to sort of say, I don't like this anymore. And regulators will always go to the thing of saying, well, how do we stop this? How do we lower the levels? How do we do this? And I think if we can actually look at the acoustic responsive houses, where the actual wave comes in and it sets up all these noises in the house, I think there's something to be looked at there. It first occurred to me when I was in a field above a salt mine, right? And they blasted underneath us, and you could hear the blast.
Yeah.
And there's no way that noise went from that thing all the way to the shaft, back up the shaft, and to me. And so what it was, that the noise was coming through the ground, and then obviously if there was a house, it then goes into the house and sets up all kinds of vibrations.
Yeah. Good point. Did you want to comment? No, I think you said it all. So let's start a research project.
Yeah. Well, I did a paper a long time ago.
I know you did.
But that was just a dipping a toe in
Yeah.
the ocean. It really needs somebody with a lot more money than I've got to take it on.
Here's something for the emerging professionals.
There you go. That's the new way.
So if nobody has any other question, I will basically wrap up and start by thanking so much for you two for giving us the privilege to be learning from these untold stories. I want to thank you also, everyone that's here, making this honor and coming all the way because it's far away. But thank you for that, for showing interest and for showing up. I also want to thank the emerging professionals and also the ISEE staff for helping us put this together and keep wanting to do this kind of thing. Especially Nathan Rouse that helped and did last year and helped during this year too with the guests and also Evan Thibault. Yeah, and thank you guys.
I want to thank you by saying obrigado.
Obrigado. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Randy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cathy.
And I also want to say thank you so much to Cathy.
Thank you.
Because she's done so much valuable research that this industry really needs. And for you emerging professionals, think about that. Think about continuing the kind of work she's doing as you go throughout your lives.
Push him. Push him.
So enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you so much for